The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
You are back in the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren. Mr. Eric, the Dr. Shapiro, is back in the house.
How you doing, Al?
I'm doing good. It's been a while. You've been out.
Yeah, I
doctoring.
know. I went by very quickly. I was traveling. I was on New York and New Jersey seeing my parents. I was in Hawaii for a wedding. So yeah, I've just been very busy.
Yeah. And what's this you're into? You're doing Kung Fu now?
Oh, I'm doing Kung Fu. Yeah. Which I love, surprisingly. I'm not athletic at all. We figured we would try it, though, my family, my wife and kids. And we're now going into our third month. Yeah, we really, really love it.
Yeah, it seems like it's good exercise, and at the same time you're learning something. And I think it's amazing. I think you and just like the Michael Hawley is another co-host are probably the two best family men I know, because you guys.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Well, because you guys do so much with your family. Like, it's you and the kids. You're doing this, and just like him, you guys do a lot with your kids and family, and I think that's great, because so many people I don't see do that.
Oh, thank you for saying that. You know, it's interesting because with social media, I realized that I wasn't, because I spend the most time with my family, I realized I wasn't playing that up. You know, my older son's 11 now. And in the past couple of years, I've been a little more open about it. For whatever reason, it was more like, it always looked like I was by myself, but I'm constantly with them. So I think I've been, not only is what you're saying true, but I've been sharing it more.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think it's a good thing. I mean,
thank you so much.
It actually, your posts like that, as well as Holly's posts, always make me smile, because you guys are always doing things with your family, doing some sort of thing like the Kung Fu, or he goes out hiking, or he does something, and it's kind of fun to watch your family do that and actually be happy. Nice. Like everybody's happy and they're having a good time, and it's more about spending time together. And I think that's really, really cool, because that's something that I never really realized, because it certainly wasn't in my life. So it's special to see people, not only that, people I know and like, that are doing this with their family. In a way, I'm proud of it, even though it's
thank you. No, that really warms my heart. Al, that might be the most uncomplicatedly sentimental thing you've ever said on the show.
Well, there you go. I think it's important. No, it's important. And I think I like to say things like that, because I love to bring people up when I can, because there's not enough of it out there,
No, thank you for saying that. I got to tell you, that's what it's all about. I feel like, because I'm in my mid-40s now, I feel like I'm heading into that phase of life where ambition is becoming less important and relationships are becoming more important. And you said it, whether it's a Kung Fu class or hiking, those days when we spend those times together or we go on trips, that is the best part of life. Yeah,
it's all that stays with you. It's all you have. Really?
It really does, yeah. And then what's interesting is I learned as a dad that your children's strongest memories going forward will be from travel. And I never knew that. And I thought of my own childhood. I was like, oh, that's actually true. Because I remember trips we took, and then I'm hearing them start to talk about the different places we've taken them. I'm like, wow, it's actually true. It gives them a really great experience. So that's a part of it also.
Yeah, and one last thing. I don't want you to get too big of a head, but even on your birthday, I'm so impressed that for you, your birthday, you'll spend it on the beach with your kids.
Oh, that's nice.
And I think that's amazing, because for me, I could never imagine my dad wanting to spend his birthday with me. No, I don't think that is a negative thing, but I'm just like, in fact, it never happened in my life. And I'm not the only one. It was the generational thing, just with the parents and stuff,
So what would they do? It would be the parents' birthday, so they'd just go out and have a dinner or something like that?
Yeah. And back then, you see, they never took us kids with them to dinner, right?
Oh, it's like that, yeah.
Right. We never went to a restaurant with them. That was just not heard of. So anyway, but that was a totally different thing. But like I said, I think it's so impressed that people do this for their kids. And so I think that gives us hope, right?
Oh, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. And I'm a big believer in the exact thing you're talking about. I actually think the quality time together supersedes the verbal relationship. Like, I talk to my kids a lot, but I think anything I can impart to them in the way of a lesson or a verbal, recounting or sharing a story, I don't think it's nearly as powerful as just being around them.
Yeah, totally. totally.
Yeah.
Now we are getting on to our interview for today. Now, it's kind of related to what we've been talking about in a sense too. It's so we're going to bring on the author. The book is called Bad Guy Lawyer, and of course the author's name is Chuck Marten. So thank you for coming on the show.
Absolutely, great to be here.
Before we get into the book too much, let's talk about where you come from and who you are. And I guess this is your first book, if I'm correct. What got you into writing?
I'm one of those people who grew up wanting to be a writer and then early on kind of chickened out. I was worried that I would not be successful enough that it would work out for me. And so what ended up happening is I decided to pivot towards a career path that seemed a little bit clearer to me in terms of, well, if you do this, then you move on to this. And if you do this, then you move on to this. And that was a path in medicine. For me, instead of the ambiguity of how does one actually become a novelist and sell books, was replaced with something much more linear. Well, you go to college, then medical school, then residency, etc. And I never really worried about getting a job and having a source of income as a doctor. But like a lot of things, when you make that type of decision, as far as your vocation goes, you always are second guessing that and thinking back, oh, if only. And so after a certain point in my medical career, I think it was an inevitability that I said, you know what? There are aspects of my career I enjoy, but there are aspects of my career where I feel a little bit of a void. And I'm going to fill that void by writing. Over time, I was able to come up with enough things to write that I could put it into a novel.
Why go to Bad Guy Lawyer? Like, why? I noticed that this is kind of a crime fiction interest in a sense, and stuff. Like, what attracts you to that?
So the book is called Bad Guy Lawyer, and the central protagonist is a former mob lawyer who's sort of on the run from his former employer. But what he does is he teams up with a back alley doctor, someone who is a surgeon for the mob, who stitches up mob henchmen when they're shot up and they can't go to the hospital. And the two of them team up to sort of solve the mystery of the lawyer character, Guy McCann, his missing girlfriend, with the hopes that once they find her, they'll be able to get some information from her that allows both of them to get the mob off their backs. And that is basically the central, aspects of the story. The idea came to me when I was in medical school because I had friends who were in law school, and I would think, kind of just wistfully in my mind, oh, what would it be like to take a back alley doctor and team him up with the mob lawyer? These are two classic tropes that you see show up in crime movies and crime novels all the time, but kind of make them central to the story and team them up. And I thought that would be a very cool, background idea for a story. And over time, I just kept thinking about, okay, who would these two people be? How would they get to the situation that they're in? How would they meet up? And, and we take it from there. And one of the things that was so fun for me as I was coming up with this idea for the story and putting it all together was, doctors and lawyers are used to being the smartest guys in the room. And so theoretically, they should be smarter than the criminals that employ them. And I thought it'd be fun to really put that to the test, take these guys and put them into, doctors and lawyers, and put them into an underground sort of element where now they're in the criminal world. Do those skill sets really come in handy, and how can they use them to their advantage when they're trying to stay alive and being chased by people trying to kill them?
Wow, that's a really good juxtaposition between like street smartness and sort of the educated intellect. That's really fascinating. It also, the way you just described that, your journey into the story, it's almost like you symbolically were going underground, right? Like becoming an artist was almost like a criminal act. So it's like, okay, you're now testing your own intellect as a doctor within the arts. It's like a symbolic mirror for the, the bad guys in your story being with the mob. Does that all register?
Absolutely, because what you end up doing is you work during the day and then you're writing at night, or when you can kind of fit it in. And actually, a lot of times I would be at work, and this is maybe, an admission that maybe I shouldn't make, but there would be times I would be in meetings, there would be times that I would be on rounds where I would just get story ideas and I would just start writing stuff in the margins of where I was, keeping all my, records for all the patients that I was rounding on so that I could remember them when I got home to start jotting them down. And so you're right. You kind of do these things on the sly and it becomes a little bit of a double life. And at the same time, in my medical career, I was experiencing some pretty wild stuff. When you're a doctor, you see some pretty crazy things. People get shot when you show up in the emergency rooms. I delivered 3 babies when I was on my OBGYN rotation in medical school. You see things that most people don't see. You encounter things, do things that most people don't get to do. And that's a privilege. And those are excellent experiences. But you also see people at the absolute worst, when they're about to die, when they're very sick, when they're at their most vulnerable. There's a lot of emotional ups and downs. And you have to be very steady during this time. And you have to have this very particular balance between being empathetic, but also at the same time dispassionate enough that you are not affected so much by someone's medical situation that you can't make the right decisions for them. And so I envisioned the doctor character in the novel as taking that sort of dispassionate aspect to an extreme, where all of a sudden he's became almost so jaded by medicine that nothing phases him, and he becomes this very cynical, emotionless character, which is why I decided to ironically call him Dr. Happy. That has a bit of a double meaning. One is because he's this really, emotionless person who never smiles, never laughs, never tells a joke in the book, but also because he's now taken his medical career to the point where it almost seems to him like a service industry. He takes jobs because they're just easy. There's a Hollywood party and he gets paid to show up and dispense pharmaceutical grade narcotics to people at the party and make sure that no one overdoses because it's just an easy way for him to get paid. But he ends up getting this nickname Dr. Happy because he's providing joy to other people by getting them high on drugs, even though he is, completely emotionally, absent throughout the novel.
Would you say he's as important as the bad guy lawyer character, or that Dr. Happy is more resolutely secondary?
I would say that they're really two sides of the coin. It's an interesting dichotomy. The lawyer character, Guy McCann, he's a little bit more of, he's a lawyer character. He's the fast talker. He is the guy who's a little bit more of a hothead. He's got a little bit of a game show host in him in terms of, and he very much is, superficial things are important to him. How he looks, how he dresses, getting the girl. And he's the one who's obsessed with finding his ex-girlfriend, not just because she may have information that could save his life, but because he really also wants her back in his life. And so I really wanted to kind of set up that dichotomy there. I really struggled with the title early on. I didn't really, part of me didn't want to subjugate Dr. Happy as a completely secondary character by making Guy McCann the title character. But early on, when I was going through ideas of titles, I was really struggling. And one day, one of my kids came over and asked what the book was about. And my wife, who had read an earlier draft already, said to him, well, it's about a lawyer who's a bad guy for, who's a lawyer for bad guys. Bad guy lawyer. I'm like, that's
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's going to be, I couldn't come up with anything better than that. So I'm like, that's where we're going to go with. And I love the title. I love the fact that when people see the title, they'll make jokes like, oh, this is the most, redundant title I've ever heard.
You took it out of my mouth. Yeah. But that's good. That's part of the fun of it.
Exactly. I feel like titles are important, because you need to give people a sense of what's going on. I love a title that gives you a little bit of a hint of what you're going to be getting into. I think that it's a bit of, I hear lots of stories from fellow writers where they come up with these very clever titles for their thriller novels, only for the publishers to decide to change it right before publication to something very generic because it, sounds like what a thriller novel should sound like, even though the title means absolutely nothing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and the publisher generally knows or should know what sells. So, it's a tough call. Like, there's the desire for that poetic title, but oftentimes the publishers want something more literal. But in your case, I think you've got it all. I think it, like you said, evokes what's in there, but it's also clever. And it was actually the reason I raised my hand to co-host today, come to think of it, because Al sends us a list of who's coming around the corner, and the title popped out. I was like, ooh, that sounds like fun. So there you go.
Great. Perfect.
In addition, the redundant thing it crossed my mind too, but it's like, that's part of the humor insofar as it's like, well, he must be extra bad if he's a bad guy lawyer. Because it's like, if the starting presumption is they're all bad. But on the other hand, if there's ever a spinoff for Dr. Happy, a few minutes ago when you said back alley doctor, that could be a title too. So.
Oh, absolutely. Dr. Happy was a lot of fun to write because as a physician, I got to write a character who got to do things and say things that I could never do in my professional life without getting sued or fired or arrested or
right.
And so that's very freeing when you get to do that. Take all the things that maybe sometimes in your worst moment you wish you could say and have that freedom.
Well, now in the book, you've got two sides of one coin, a doctor and a lawyer, and you're a doctor. So you have all the requisite expertise, as you just said, and all the experiences. But you're not a lawyer, so how was that in terms of balancing that scale? Like, what did you do on the lawyer side to get the authenticity that equals the doctor side?
Sure. Well, first of all, it started with, I had a really good idea of what a guy's personality was like, what his motivations were. And so once I had that, I said, okay, I know what he wants to say or what he wants to do. I just have to give him a little bit of a vocabulary. And I also kind of reread through a lot of the medical scenes because there's a lot of scenes that take place in hospitals, emergency rooms in the novel. There's a scene where Dr. Happy has to perform bedside, surgery in a hotel room. And so I looked through and saw, okay, the level of detail I was giving just automatically from my medical background and said, okay, let me do my due diligence and do some research so I can apply some similar level of authenticity to when Guy really has to employ his craft. So I read a couple novels, I read a couple nonfiction books that were written, either biographies or autobiographies of former mob lawyers, actually, including someone who was attorney for Santo Trafficante, who was a very central mafia figure during the, kind of golden era of the mafia during the Godfather type of years, before and during the Cuban Revolution. And so I learned a lot about how the types of cases that a lawyer who represents a mafia figure might take on, what types of, interactions they would have with judges, what types of, what the outcomes in some of those cases would be. And in some of these books, we would get a lot of descriptions about conversations that he would have with his employer. And that gave me some ideas in terms of the dynamic to a point. And then afterwards, I do have lawyer friends. I would just ask them little tidbits here or there. And I wanted to employ a little bit, just not a lot. I wanted to make it interesting, obviously, but a little kind of mundane things here and there, just again, to give you that everyday, day-to-day thing. Because I think that one of the fun things about writing about Dr. Happy is I could just pick little details that I recalled from my medical career to throw them in, like you said, to give that authenticity. But even if it's just a tiny thing, just about, finding a white coat to put on when he goes into the hospital, just because he knows once he's wearing the white coat, no one's going to look at him twice. He can pretty much go wherever he wants in the hospital to do what he needs to do.
When you're talking about the back alley doctor and stuff, is it a pretty realistic character? Like, are there people really like that you've come across or that you've kind of met in your time in the medical career you had?
No. To be honest, I think this is really steeped in, I think this remains very much a trope in movies and novels. There are bad doctors. There are doctors who do bad things, who lose their licenses, who get sued and are actually found criminally negligent for some of the things that they do. But I think that by and large, those doctors view themselves as good doctors. A lot of times, those doctors who are practicing irresponsible medicine probably don't even realize they're doing it. They probably think they're doing the right thing. They just aren't even aware of how poorly they're providing care to their patients. Dr. Happy is someone who makes a very conscious decision to work, to be employed by doing things that he knows are illegal. And I think that, in order for that to happen, someone has to really majorly screw up in order to find themselves. Because after going through college, medical school, and spending all the money, and time to get to that point in life, to end up finding yourself delivering a craft where you're basically just a glorified drug dealer is quite a drop. I don't think that there's a lot of these guys really out there. Really, the way I looked at it is, it's something that you see in movies and you see in TV shows and you see in books all the time. And I wanted to take that classic trope and kind of breathe a little bit of new life into it and use it in this, in this way to help tell this story.
Talking about your experience in the medical profession and having that, were you ever worried about some of the real stuff that you went through and who you were kind of crossing into some of the fiction that you were writing?
Well, there's definitely parts in the book that are taken from real life. But at the same time, you need to respect your patient's privacies, and I would never write anything that would, where a patient would read the book and realize that I was writing about them. I would always change details to the point where, anything that actually happened, you wouldn't be able to identify it in the book itself. You just take certain situations, certain details, and you kind of tie things together in a way that helps drive the narrative or provide important details to the story. But I can tell you that there's one thing that I noticed after I read the book, after I finished the book and was going through the editing phases, is I realized that there's a lot of doctor characters in the book. Some are main characters and others just show up just for a chapter. And then I realized, I was really surprised that all of these doctor characters either engage in criminal behavior, are incompetent at their jobs, or just jerks, or some combination thereof. There aren't any really good guy doctors in the book. And I really did not consciously set out to represent physicians in that way. In real life, all the doctors I trained with, that I worked with, that I know socially are wonderful, talented, law-abiding people. So there must have been something I was subconsciously working out of my own when I wrote the book. I don't know. But I wanted to go on record saying that none of the physicians that I know personally are really represented in this book. All the doctors that I know are wonderful people, unlike the folks that show up in the novel.
Well, and that's interesting. That's such an interesting area because no doubt they're wonderful people. I mean, they're ethical and upstanding and guided by a moral conscience. But might you have been, and don't let me put words in your mouth, were you, as you said, subconsciously expressing something perhaps as to the temperament of doctors or certain doctors?
Yeah, I think that everyone is aware of a phenomenon that's going on right now in the United States of doctor burnout. Physicians leaving medicine because they're feeling burned out. There's a lot of frustration that occurs in medicine. And I think one of the things that isn't talked about very much is people get into medicine to take care of patients, to perform surgery, to prescribe the right medications, to come up with the right diagnosis. They don't go into medicine to fill out paperwork and call social workers and, all of the other, and deal with insurance companies, all this other stuff that actually becomes, over the years, has become an increasingly larger proportion of what doctors spend their time doing. And they're not really getting paid for that extra stuff. They're still just getting paid for the care they deliver to patients. And if you are doing that for your career for long enough, you're going to get frustrated. And that frustration needs to, you have to find some way to vent that frustration in a healthy way. And so I think, maybe that probably did help me out in terms of turning to the dark side a little bit in terms of painting medicine in a sometimes not so bright light.
Right. I mean, because I want to come up with the right way to say this without it crossing a line, because of course, I mean, needless to say, what doctors do with their lives is the utmost in virtuous and compassionate. And my perception is in alignment with what you said about how, by and large, I mean, these are wonderful people. But there can be the perception among some doctors, not all, but it happens here and there, that there might be an attitude. So what you're saying, what you're attributing perhaps to burnout. So maybe that was the source of drama for you to enhance that. Is that accurate?
Yes, to a degree. I think there's other elements too. I think we've all come across doctors who maybe seemed a little cocky, a little bit, overly dispassionate, a little bit dismissive. Most people probably have had lots of, I would say more and more every day. I think you're going to come up with people who feel like they haven't really had the best experiences with their doctor. And I think that has a lot to do with just the inefficiencies and imperfections of American modern medicine. At the same time, when you're in medical school, when you're in residency, it's very stressful. You're working very long hours and you're doing, and you're seeing some really scary stuff sometimes. And in dealing with traumatic situations. And sometimes the only way you can really cope with that is to develop a little bit of a gallows humor. And with behind closed doors, there'll be a lot of, things that you wouldn't necessarily want patients or other people to hear, just in terms of the humor that you're using as a sort of, coping mechanism. And so there's a little bit of a vocabulary that occurs behind closed doors that I think, you also, I also maybe tapped into a little bit just in terms of the way that Dr. Happy is sometimes, and other doctors in the book are a bit dismissive of the patients or their colleagues.
Got it. Now, I'm curious to hear your insights, because all of that is so fascinating, as to the moral pathway of a lawyer, because it starts from a different matrix of motives, perhaps. Certainly not, like you said, doctors by and large start off wanting to care for patients and prescribe medicine. Like what was your archetype as to the lawyer starting off, and what sort of moral waters did you find yourself going into there?
Oh, absolutely. Guy McCann, the bad guy lawyer, he wants to make money and he wants to be famous and, have the stature of a top lawyer and have the cachet that comes with that. That's what he wants. And that's what he's always wanted. He started off very naive. I tap into his backstory a little bit. There's 3 chapters that provide a little bit of a flashback so you can see a little bit of evolution of Guy McCann from someone who's really just kind of coming out of law school when he's still very naive. He knows that he wants to be successful. He's very, puts a high premium on making money, on being seen in the right place, wearing the right clothes, dating a very good looking woman. And for him, getting the right clients is the way to do that. And what ends up happening is the right client ends up being a mafia figure who ironically becomes his worst nightmare. He initially starts getting all the things that he wants, money, stature, the girl. But once he realizes that he's made a bit of a deal with the devil and things go south, he finds that now all of a sudden he has to give up everything he ever wanted, because when the novel starts out, he's actually no longer in the nice area of Los Angeles where he was practicing. Now he's in Las Vegas, basically giving, backroom legal advice to low-level crooks just to, more or less, quote unquote, pay the bills. He's experienced his fall from grace, and that's how the novel starts out. And he's trying to not even dig himself back up. I don't think that's even an option for him anymore. His motivations now are just to stay alive.
It seems like the vibe I'm getting amid all the depth of what you're saying, maybe it's because of the juxtaposition between the doctor and the lawyer. It seems like there's a lot of humor in the novel. Maybe it's coming from the title too, because in addition to the crime and thriller elements, which are strong, there seems to be a sardonic thing going on.
Oh, without question. I think I think it's a funny novel. I hope other people find it funny, but it's a very dark, and it's a dark humor that's interspersed between a bit of violence and some uncomfortable situations. But Guy McCann, he's a lawyer and he's a fast talker and he's got a wit and and the whole kind of, what I would say about Guy at the beginning of the novel is he's lost everything except his mouth. His ability to talk himself out of trouble is really the only thing that he has going for him. And he teams that up with Dr. Happy, who has this medical acumen that allows him to play a little bit of a Sherlock Holmes type of character where he can help Guy, fill in the gaps between his legal knowledge and to figure out what they need to figure out to find Blair and take care of themselves. But it's interesting, too, because these are two people who are used to being the smartest guy in the room. And when I say they're teaming up, I mean, they're butting heads as much as they're teaming up. This is a reluctant part. These two people are together simply because they see each other as the only way for them to keep the mob off their back and stay alive. And so you've got two people who are used to being the smartest people in the room, and now they're arguing over who's the smartest person in the room whenever they're together. And so that provides a lot of the humor, too, trying to see, it's almost like the beginning of a joke, right? A doctor and a lawyer walk into a bar. So I certainly try to make use of that as much as possible in the novel.
How is it that the underworld people, the mob bosses, are proven to be more intelligent in certain ways than your main characters?
Well, I think both of them, the guy in particular has a fatal flaw, and that's his ego. And so the fact that he perhaps thinks he's more clever than he really is, that gets exploited. And I think the other thing is that the mafia figures, they've been around the block in a way that Guy has not. They've gotten their hands dirty before in ways that Guy has not, and in ways that Guy probably is not capable of doing. They are willing to enable, and they've shown, the precedent of sinking to a level that perhaps Guy is not comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, Guy and Dr. Happy, these are white-collar guys, right? Now, they've sunk to a level where now they're associating with these criminals, but they are not themselves murderers. They are not themselves, have not themselves, given to the depths that these guys, were born into.
I'd imagine that you have some sort of a subtext underneath the story, the entertainment value of the book. So they're something that you want a reader to take away or think about, besides the action, so to speak.
Well, there's a couple things. One thing that we haven't talked about is that the book takes place in 1987, and that was a conscious decision for a lot of reasons. One being that at the time, I was reading a lot of Elmore Leonard and Donald Westlake, and I kind of felt that this, given the subject matter, this is a dark book. I felt that I wanted it to read like the type of paperback novel that you might find in your dad's attic. I wanted to really have that dime store paperback, that pulp novel kind of feel. But in setting it in the 1987, I also had to be a little bit cognizant of, gender roles at the time, class roles at the time, and, remind myself, okay, I have to make sure that I'm not being too modern with some of the situations, some of the dialogue. And so, but at the same time, doctors and lawyers, we tend to elevate them, to a higher class. But in this book, really at the end of the day, everyone's on equal footing because everyone is trying to stay alive and everyone is really being forced to do things that you wouldn't normally see them do under day-to-day circumstances because of that.
How do you find that people react in real life when you're a doctor as compared to what's written in books generally?
So you mean in my career or just in like day-to-day? Find out I'm a doctor.
Yeah, in your career or even day to day as a doctor, how real life is it compared to what we see in other books or TV?
Yeah, well, I think I alluded to this before. If you were to take an entire week of me working in the hospital and you wanted to put that into a movie or TV show or write about it in a novel, that would be entertaining, that people would want to consume, you would probably cut an entire week down to maybe 2 or 3 minutes, right? Most of what I do is not very interesting. And to be honest, when you are a doctor, if you really don't want things to get too exciting. If things get too exciting, it usually means that someone's life is in jeopardy and that's a bad thing. And so I used to say that a boring day at work was a good day at work.
Well, how much of yourself has gone into your characters?
Well, a bit. I think that what I tried to do is I really needed Guy and Dr. Happy to be distinct on the page. I needed them to really have distinct voices, personalities, and motivations. So to help, particularly in writing the dialogue, I felt like I had to tap into slightly different parts of myself and be cognizant of exactly who of myself I was tapping into to assist, particularly with the dialogue writing, particularly when they're talking to each other. And I think that everyone has, a side of them that's maybe a little bit more vain and self-centered than they wish it was. And that's Guy. And sometimes you kind of feel like, really right now, all I want to do is be left alone. I wish that, I'm walking by this guy, on the corner who's asking for change. And today I feel bad for him. So today I'm going to give him some change. But, part of me wishes that I could just walk past him without feeling bad at all, and so that part of you that, like, that's not a good part of you, but, it's there, none of us is perfect. And so, you kind of tap into these different parts, and then blow that up to, imagine that none of the other parts of you exist. And that was allowed to, walk around and live unchecked. And that sort of starts to approximate, the characters, at least enough that you can write them. Obviously, they're a little bit more layered than that. They're not, they're both of them have good qualities too. And at the end of the day, they do come to really respect each other, and they really do come to form a partnership, and they really do show a type of loyalty to each other that, they did not at the beginning of the novel. But I think that you have to be willing to, at least myself, I had to be willing to admit that there are some imperfect parts of me, in order to really tap into that and write these characters realistically.
What's your process like when you're writing this? In the sense of, are you experiencing your characters? Do you feel them, see them like a movie, or how do you sit down and go through these scenarios?
So the first thing is I really needed to get the feel for what the book was going to be. And so I almost created in my mind a trailer. Like, imagine the book was a movie. What would the trailer look like? What would the music be? What would the, mood and setting be? And then once I kind of got a sense of that, I said, okay, that mood, that feeling, that's got to be imbued in every page. So I got to hold on to that during this entire writing process. I already knew who the core characters were going to be. I was able to kind of come up with some really cool anecdotes from my medical career or things that I read about in some of the research that I was doing. So I would just jot those down and then kind of create a skeletal plot that really just kind of connected all these elements together. And then I would just lay, the meat and the fat on top of those bones. And in doing so, I would have to come up with new characters. I would have to come up with new scenes I hadn't, considered before in order to connect different events. And once I kind of, I just kept layering layers and layers and layers until I really had a very long outline that really spelled everything out. And then it was just really that document ended up turning into the first draft. So I went from literally the same Word document that was just one page of this little outline. That same document later became, the first draft of the manuscript.
So let's talk about people finding you. Do you run a website? Do you do any social media? How do you like to connect with readers?
So I like to connect through my website, chuckmarten.com. That's Marten. I have all announcements in terms of both this book plus my new novel that'll be coming out in May. That's called The Green Stick Fracture. That both that book and Bad Guy Lawyer published by Down and Out Books, so providing updates on that. Also try to give a little bit of news in terms of if I'm going to be on a podcast or at a writing conference, and also a little bit of, when I get around to it, a little bit of original writing, short stories, or other little anecdotes that I'd like to add on. So chuckmarten.com is the best way to get all that content.
Now that you've gone into it, you have the first novel. Do you have the bug now? Do you just want to keep going and one after the other, or Will it be more once in a while? What are you saying?
I would love to put out a book a year. We'll see if I have, the stamina for that. But the second book just kind of came out really out of nowhere. I literally, and this is going to seem so cliche, but I literally had a dream about, where I was woken up by my son, who was still, not sleeping through the night yet. So I wake up in the early morning and I still had the dream fresh in my mind, the way that you do when you get unnaturally woken up from sleep. And I was like, God, that was such a crazy dream. And so I was like, the whole next day, all I could think about is what would put someone in that situation that happened. And what happened in the dream was someone walked into a bar and ran into someone who was in the bar, couldn't see that person's face, and that person attacked them for no reason. And so I took that event and I just came up with how would that person get from point A to there, and then what would happen next. And, I was able to just sit down and write that. And this book is about a medical student. It's a little bit more of a medical thriller than Bad Guy Lawyer is, but it's much more light. It's fast paced. It's a much more of a comedic novel because it's a medical mystery in a sense, but the central protagonist is a medical student. He's not yet a doctor, so he doesn't know everything about medicine, far from it. And so his lack of mastery of medicine leads him to being, equivocates to his lack of mystery of being able to solve crimes. And so he's a little bit of a imperfect detective as he tries to solve the mystery of how he broke his hand. He gets dumped by his girlfriend, uncharacteristically has one drink too many as he's trying to mend his broken heart, wakes up the next day and his right hand is wrapped in a cast. He has a huge sum of money missing from his bank account, and he has no recollection of the events of the night before. And so he takes upon himself to try to piece this together, and he ends up just stumbling into one problem after another to the point where you wonder maybe he should have just stayed in bed.
Do these stories take place in one universe? Is it the same fictional world, or is the main connective tissue the medical component?
So that's the medical component is really the only connector. The green stick fracture takes place in the 1990s in Manhattan, whereas Bad Guy Lawyer takes place in 1980s Los Angeles. And again, it's a very different book too. This is a very funny book first and foremost. It's like I said, it has medical thriller, medical mystery aspects of it. Has definitely crime elements in it. There is a mafia aspect of it too. There's it's also about a guy with a broken heart who is trying to get over his girlfriend. I liken it to a little bit of a cross between The Flight Attendant meets Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Are you going to keep drawing from your medical expertise? Does that seem like the outlook at the moment?
It does. It seems like the easiest way to stay genuine in my writing, to be perfectly honest. But I think that there are still many, many more interesting medical experiences that I can draw from. And I think that it is definitely something that I can help inform my writing and guide my writing and in ways of, coming up with fresh plots and, offering the readers a level of authenticity. I think the last thing I would want to do is, write a novel about, your typical spy thriller, espionage thriller without knowing anything, about the world of espionage. That's not, even if I came up with the greatest plot in the world, you have to know what you're writing about. And so certainly, writing, having that medical thriller aspect of it in the writing, that certainly is easy because of my background. But if I ever run out of ideas, then I'm going to start to, hit the library, hit the internet, and start doing some research so I can provide that level of authenticity to.
Why do you think, this is my last question, why do you think the medical profession gels so naturally with the thriller genre?
Well, there's always a mystery in medicine. There's always, I think there's a reason why, you think about the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes was a physician. And now you have House MD, going full circle, where you have the Sherlock Holmes character who actually is a physician, whose gift is trying to make diagnoses in patients where no one else knows what's going on. And there's, and that's what medicine is. When you have a patient who has these symptoms that you don't know what's wrong with them, you look for signs and symptoms and you put them together. You're looking for clues in their body and through tests in order to figure out what's going on. So every time I meet a new patient, I approach it like I'm trying to solve a little bit of a mystery. And I think that to lay people, so much of medicine is a black box. There's a magical like, okay, I had this symptom, I went to the doctor and they told me this, they gave me this treatment and now I'm better. And sometimes it kind of seems like a little bit of a magic act, even though you can go online and type in your symptoms and get answers. So many times that's not actually what's going on. So many times the doctors are going to go through a completely different algorithm to figure out what's going on and to treat you. So I think those aspects of it, very easily lend itself to the thriller genre.
Wow. Now, so this book came out in March of this year.
Mm-hmm.
You must have been writing a lot of this over the pandemic thing. And how was that for you?
So it's interesting. I actually wrote the first draft of it pre-pandemic. In fact, quite a few years before the pandemic started. But I was still working as a doctor, and I really didn't have the courage or the knowledge of what to do with this early manuscript, where to take it, what to do with it. Finally, when the pandemic came, I had all this time because I wasn't, seeing patients in the hospital for several months. I was seeing them remotely on the computer. I had a lot more free time. And so I was able to, find an editor, find a publisher and go through all these steps, go through, subsequent drafts, get it polished, get it ready for publication, help with the stages of pre-publication. And so that was wonderful. And then as the pandemic wore on, much longer, obviously than any of us initially thought, I was able to take that time and write the second novel, The Green Stick Fracture. So The Green Stick Fracture was born out of that time too.
Wow. Were you sort of surprised in the way that a lot of people in the public handle or didn't handle the pandemic?
Not surprised in the sense that early on I had a feeling that there was going to be a proportion of the population who is very distrustful about medical recommendations. And I think what surprised me was to what degree. And the other thing that surprised me was that I needed to be reminded that there's a big difference between medicine and policy. So there's what the doctors think should be done, and then there's what government figures think should be done. And one does not directly translate to the other. And we have to, and so I was reminded in this process that, you can be the best doctor in the world and you can have the best doctors give you the best advice in the world, but translating what I would tell an individual patient sitting across the desk from me, what is best for that individual person is very different than what is best, than what you tell an entire country, is best for, them or for the country.
Right. So we should be drinking bleach.
I think that we should be critical of the information that we're getting, including, and there's nothing wrong with being critical of what your doctor tells you. You should ask your doctor questions. And if you're not sure why he is making a diagnosis, why he's prescribing medication, ordering a test, there's nothing wrong with asking your doctor questions about, why he's making or she is making the recommendations that they are. But so I think that we need to, apply some level of critical thinking, across the board, including, what's, especially, what we're, if you're getting, and to be perfectly honest, anyone who's taking medical advice unfiltered from the internet, from social media, you really have to wonder if that's the wisest decision. Why don't you double check that with someone on an individual basis? I read this online. Is this best for me?
Yeah. The Star magazine told me.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Al is a fervent pro-vaxxer. He was telling me before the show. He's got the flu. He's got monkeypox and COVID vaccines, not the diseases. So we're ready to go.
Yeah. You have to be ready. Yeah. Nothing wrong with it. Well, it's certainly an interesting conversation, and it sounds like a great book. Now, the book we've been talking about is Bad Guy Lawyer, and the author has been our guest, Mr. Chuck Marten. So thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on. This has been great.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.